Modern video games started with the arcade. If you want to be really pedantic, then it started with pinball or something that companies still try to sell today, but with all different kinds of IP slapped all over it as a skin to distract you from the fact that you could probably find it somewhere for free online. The arcade video games that shape the industry, though, are the Donkey Kongs, the Pac-Mans, the Pongs, the Asteroids. You know, the kind of games where you die fast and get your money sucked away faster than Sonic when he's going around the loop-de-loop of a level. I don't know, anyway. It was in the arcade that video games also developed the bad habit of wanting to extort as much cash as possible from the player. These companies built games designed to keep you spending it for days and weeks and months, and as video games move away from the arcade cabinet to the home console, the design philosophies never really went away. The early console games were infamously near impossible, employing the same tactics as the arcade, but without the added benefit of you playing per life. Now, jump to 2024, skipping the 80s game crash, the exploitative DLC wave, the loot box frenzy, because all of those things were nothing really, just minor bumps in the road to where game companies wanted us to end up. The video game arcade, or as we put it these days, the game as a service. Now, you may think me insane for this, thinking that I'm just fitting this into my narrative and spinning a web of lies about how video games have always and will always be about trying to take every last cent out of your pocket, and yeah, I mean, obviously, doesn't make it not true. Think about it for a second. Don't even need to dig that deep. Just think about how these massive games as a service act these days. And tell me people aren't acting just like a kid in an arcade, putting another quarter in for another go-round. Games like Fortnite, Genshin, Warzone, League, Helldivers. I mean, even to extent Final Fantasy XIV and other MMOs.
Welcome to Tyrol.
They all have a very simple and addictive loop that keeps players coming back time and time again, spending most, if not all of their time playing in just these one games. It may not be the lives themselves that people are buying now, but it's that same dynamic just elevated to a whole new level. Lives are replaced with cosmetics, or time savers, or character slots, or level boosts, or even just basic credits to buy any of those things. Same system, but now instead of Creepy Joe who runs the arcade getting the quarters, it goes straight to the CEOs and shareholders. It's why we've seen a massive boom in live service games, and the ones I mentioned before make sense. Multiplayer and collaborative games make sense to be in this model. Some of them may be a little scummy, but that's a different conversation. I'm more focused on how companies are forcing all types of games to move into this live service model. Fallout 76 is a big one. On paper, Bethesda could roll up an MMO as it did with The Elder Scrolls Online, but instead, it moved to the traditional model that many live service games do these days, and the result was an empty, buggy, and disastrous game that even upon critical reevaluation, many critics and players still advised to skip. Yet they kept the lights on, kept adding small updates that kept things ticking over, adding things to their game store, and lo and behold, when the show came out, instead of funneling people towards the single-player, one-time purchase Fallout games that contain all of the elements people loved in the show, everything went towards the live service game that was in the middle of that critical reevaluation. Yet on the other hand, we had No Man's Sky, that at launch was a critical failure and had the biggest player backlash ever until Cyberpunk 2077. But over time, that morphed from a single-player experience into a live service game. Yet, upon launch, there was no consideration from a vast number of consumers that this would be a game supported like it has been. It's been a beacon for many to say that the live service they're invested in could turn out like this, but No Man's Sky's reputation was built from a slow build-up, rather than a launch of it being a service game. Fallout 76 and No Man's Sky are two sides of the live service coin, coming from very different approaches and studios, and represent the best and worst of the practice when applied to a type of game that doesn't traditionally fit the service format. Many single-player experiences, whilst not going fully live service, have been taking more and more elements that dilute the single-player experience. I recently reviewed Assassin's Creed Odyssey and found this issue throughout infinite repeatable quests, and its in-game microtransaction shop, despite the game being a solely single-player experience. Sales of these live service games are obviously slowing down. There are many reasons why we've seen these brutal layoffs in the industry this year, and I can't help but think that spending lots of money on a pipe dream live service contributes to it. especially when we see such public failures as Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, that lost Warner $200 million. Of course, we're still seeing successes in Helldivers 2, but at the same time, Sony has cancelled most of its other live service games to focus instead on prestige single-player content. So it's possible the industry as a whole is starting to agree that there can only be so many live service games before the market is full. I also think it's interesting that sports games haven't made the jump. On paper, any of EA Sports or 2K's sports library should be ripe for quick cash cow live service content that runs off shorter licenses, and yet we've seen yearly sports content continue to be released. It also looked for a while that Call of Duty might make its multiplayer segment into a pure live service, yet now it seems that isn't happening, and the yearly releases will continue with only Warzone staying live service and using the annual game for easy replaceable content. I personally think there is space for both games as a service and single-player and traditional multiplayer experiences. I just look at the modern landscapes and don't see games becoming services because it serves them or the consumer, but rather serves the companies and their margins. A game like Helldivers 2...
You have been assaulted with line of freedom. Extract when ready.
A game like Helldivers 2 brings a uniquely multiplayer story to the table, whereas something like Suicide Squad was just done to follow an executive trend. Many of the big marquee games as a service failures weren't built to be a service, but rather had the service tacked on because companies wanted those sweet quarters. There luckily has been a lot of pushback when it comes to games as a service, as well as questioning digital ownership, which is frequently wrapped up within the live service debate. Many people do not want to have to pay monthly or feel uneasy about if their game will be taken away at the whim of a corporation. Stop Killing Games is an initiative that's been looking into legal ways to protect the consumer as well as preserve the work of talented developers, which has started to bring questions of what is and isn't a service to the gaming industry. There are also those that don't want that and see video games less as art and more as a product that the consumer never does own. Video games as an art is a whole separate discussion, but whilst it may be technically correct that consumers only own licenses to their games, I do wonder if the industry would be as profitable if every game was forced to market their product as a $60 rental.